Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Miscellaneous Gab, and today I'm taking you back into the desert, into the planet Arrakis once more. If you recently saw Dune Part 2, if you read the book, if you're just hungering to know what happens next, what happens to Paul Atreides, Chani, Irulan, Stilgar, well, fear not, because today we are going over a complete and spoiler-filled Dune Messiah book review, breakdown, plot summary, what have you. So if any of that sounds good to you, grab a glass of spice wine, grab a snack, and let's dive in together. So you guys know that the Dune books are weird, and they get even weirder as you read on. This is in part because the books themselves are psychological and psychedelic novels written in the 60s. The thing to know about Dune Messiah is a lot happens, but also not a lot happens. There are entire chapters that are just conversations between people. Sometimes what you think the obvious thing is not what happens, or what might make the most logical sense is not what happens. And that's partly because we're dealing with so many different kinds of people. They all have their own training. They all have their own methods of communicating, and that can make actually the conversations to be the most stimulating part of the Dune universe. For non-book readers, the movies do show us a flavor of this weirdness, but they mostly hold back compared to what's in the book. Because there aren't any film clips or really many illustrations out there that are copyright free for me to share, so I actually put together a presentation for you all using Midjourney AI. This is not a sponsored video, by the way, but I've always been really curious to use AI for image generation, and using Midjourney AI was really cool. I was able to describe the scenes, the characters I wanted, their descriptions. I did use mostly the book descriptions for these characters, so that's why they might look a bit different than the characters in the movie. Let's talk about the premise of this book. This book takes place 12 years in the future after Paul Atreides ascends to the emperor of basically the universe. There has been a jihad raging throughout the galaxy. Billions of people have died. Chapter 1 is probably one of the most important chapters in the whole book, so I'm probably going to spend the most time on it. Chapter 1 opens with the classic politicking, plots within plots that we all love so much about Dune. The maneuvering, the secret meetings, the hidden languages, the physiological patterns of speech. These things are so quintessentially Dune, and we get a whole helping of them as soon as the book begins. The first chapter covers a conversation, a very important conversation between the key parties who oppose Paul and his jihad. This discussion takes place on Wall 9, which is a planet ruled by the Bene Gesserit Gaius Helen Mohiam. Let's talk about who is there, because that is really important. So we have Princess Irulan, our girl Irulan. She is torn right now between the duties of her Bene Gesserit training and her loyalty for Paul. Maybe not necessarily love for Paul, because there is no love between them. It's more her desire to bear a royal heir who will inherit the empire. She has been basically ignored and abandoned as his royal bride. She has never shared his bed. Paul is still very loyal to his girl Chani. So that will be very interesting to see what the movies do, because they changed Chani's character completely and made her Mrs. Girlboss. Gaius Helen Mohiam is there. Helen Mohiam is still petty AF. She is not down for what has been going on. Another member that we have there, now these are super important characters, but the movie has not really got into them. So we have a dude, if you can call him a dude, called Edric. Now Edric, this is what Midjourney came up with for Edric. Edric is kind of a fish man, amphibious, humanoid dude who has taken so much spice that he is no longer quite human. So description right from the book: the guildsman was an elongated figure, vaguely humanoid, with finned feet and hugely fanned membranous hands, a fish in a strange sea. He's a guild steersman. He also represents CHOAM. They're basically an intergalactic organization, the monopoly that kind of controls all commerce and transportation across the known universe. Because Edric has absorbed and ingested so much spice over the years, he serves as a blocker for Irulan, so Paul can't really see her. He thinks she's off visiting her Bene Gesserit sisters. It's sort of serves as a blind spot into Paul's ability to see through that. We also have a being called Scytale. Scytale is a Tleilaxu face dancer. Now, the Tleilaxu, they come from a group called the Beni Tleilax. This is another group in the Dune universe that we haven't really got into. Quote, the customs and ethics of the Beni Tleilax led to a widespread revulsion by the other cultures of the known universe, a reaction that did little to quench the Tleilaxu's hunger to subjugate their rivals. Their skills with genetic engineering, however, made them effectively necessary evil. So if you lose an arm, you need a mechanical arm, go to the Beni Tleilax. You lose a few eyes, you need a couple mechanical eyeballs, Beni Tleilax, they got you. They're kind of those people that are doing the gross job that no one else wants to, but a face dancer, which this man Scytale is, he can change his appearance at will. He can become male or female. He can take on the appearance and of anybody that they want. So what do we learn? We learn several things, all very important from this meeting. We learn that Jessica is back on Caladan and she has distanced herself from the fanaticism of her son's rule. Jessica has always been cautious of Paul as the prophet, which is a marked difference, and one of the things I really disagree that the film did differently. The film made Jessica evil girl boss. Jessica is kind of responsible for the fanaticism. That's not how it is in the book at all. We also learn that Chani has been fed a contraceptive by the princess Irulan. So if we thought those two didn't like each other at the end of Dune, they definitely don't like each other now. Unfortunately, because of this, no one is having babies. We also learn about the plot to destroy Paul in the form of psychic poisoning. How are they going to do this? Well, this is a crazy reveal. Jason Momoa, you better get back into the Dune universe. During the siege of Arrakis, even when Leto was killed, they found Duncan Idaho's body, took his body, and then bewitched his flesh in the form of a gula. Now, a gula is another creation of the Beni Tleilax that uses flesh memory. It has the look, sound, and even the mannerisms because it has that flesh memory. By sending Duncan Idaho, this will somehow bring about Paul's downfall. You might be wondering, is it going to be a secret? Is it that Paul really won't know the difference? No, they say that the gula can be 100% honest with Paul and that Paul can know the truth essentially from the get-go. The Bene Gesserit have not let go of their breeding program goals. They want to create their own Kwisatz Haderach, something that they can control, and there's even this desire to have a child between Paul and Aaliyah, thereby really solidifying the genetic line. We realize in this chapter that everyone has their own ways of communicating. They're not just sitting here speaking English like you and me. Everyone kind of has their own interpretation of this. People have doubts, people have conflicted loyalties. Pretty much the only thing bonding these people is their desire to take down Paul Atreides' reign, and they're not even so sure about that. Now, in chapter 2, we check in with Paul. We understand that it's lonely being emperor. There's a lot of people out there that think Paul is this Anakin Skywalker, horrible anti-hero. I think he's always been reluctantly stepping into this role. In the books, we never really see him actually enjoy the power that he has. He feels like he has to take it upon himself because he is just a pawn in this galactic chess game. And we see that with 12 years, that has only gotten worse. It is lonely at the top. He wishes he could renounce his godhead. We check in with Paul and Chani. Chani actually begs Paul to have a child with Irulan. He calls this a quote, Fremen decision. In Chani's mind, if Irulan has Paul's child and there is a royal heir, that will give their enemies less leverage. Irulan will be less likely to betray Paul and perhaps might even have sway over the Bene Gesserit. Paul is very against having a child with Irulan. Paul really wants to just return to CH Tabor. He is having mad nostalgia for just the good old days of being a Fremen, riding worms, just falling in love with Chani, chilling. He sees in his visions that Chani will die if she gives birth. So he sees Chani's death in his visions. Chapter 3 is another very strange one. Scytale, remember the face dancer, he goes out into the desert dressed as Duncan Idaho, and he visits an old Fremen, an old Fedaykin. This is a Fremen from the old days named Farak. Appearing as Duncan Idaho, he goes to kind of get the tea on the conspiracy amongst the Fremen, because there are some Fremen who also miss the good old days. Farak feeds information about the conspiracy to Duncan Idaho / Scytale Sightail via Samuta, which is a drug-induced musical trance that allows you to almost communicate information when you're in that trance, like a download. Once Duncan Idaho / Sightail gets his bag, he kills Farak and adopts his appearance. He then kidnaps a man named Othime's daughter. That's just going to be important later. So he kidnaps a Fremen woman, a woman who is addicted to the Samuta. Chapter 4, we check in on Aaliyah. That's my picture of Aaliyah from Midjourney, as well as Irulan. We see the power dynamic with Aaliyah and Irulan. There are so many people who are just weirded out by Aaliyah because she's been able to talk and know things about the universe since she was approximately 5 minutes old. We also see really how terrible that Paul is to Irulan. He disrespects her publicly, constantly. I understand why she might be conspiring against him. We also just check in on the religious fanaticism. We understand that pilgrims come and go from Dune every year to pay homage to Muad'Dib. There's a quote, "Everywhere there is peace," Paul thought, "everywhere except in the heart of Muad'Dib." So a lot of this book is Paul reflecting on his legacy, reflecting on his inevitable downfall. Chapter 5, along the same lines, Paul is lonely and emo. Everyone either hates him and wants to undermine him or is obsessed with him and doesn't even see him as a person, but as a god. As you might imagine, that would be quite lonely and hard. Duncan Idaho arrives as Hate. He is called Hate the Gula, but he looks like Duncan Idaho. The only thing different, as you can see from this photo, are his eyeballs. They're kind of mechanical, cold, they're expressionless. Paul immediately asks him, like, what's going on here? What's your problem? Are you here to, like, why are you here? And remember I said, they're not trying to cover up anything. So right away, Hate is like, yeah, I'm here to destroy you. They sent me here to destroy you, and you should probably send me away because the goal here is to destroy you. And Paul's like, okay, sounds great. Come on in. Come on in. This time, Aaliyah, who people call her the virgin harlot, she's coming of age. She sees him and is like, ooh, okay, Jason Momoa. Chapter 6, Gaius Helen Mohiam has been imprisoned on the planet. Irulan visits the Reverend Mother, who urges her to kill Chani. There's kind of a fracture between them. They're not on the same page, and this is kind of where we see the conspiracy start to fracture because everyone has their own goals, everyone has their own methods, everyone has their own background. It would be like if you put me and maybe an Oompa Loompa and the flying purple people eater and Shrek and also a worm in the same room, and like we only had one goal, which was like we just didn't like the same person. Well, obviously we're all gonna have vastly different ways of dealing with that. Chapter 7 is that Chani is just sad. Chani's sad and lonely. She's resigned. Wham, wham, wham. Aaliyah trains naked. There's the scene where she's just training naked. Midjourney did not allow me to have any NSFW content. So she's training naked. Paul and Stilgar, this is Stilgar, by the way, this is Midjourney's interpretation of Stilgar. They walk in and Aaliyah's like, well, I don't really need to put clothes on because you've already kind of seen me naked, so whatever. And Stilgar, who is basically like Stilgar's straight edge, right? He wants to enforce Muad'Dib's reign to a T. He's like, all right, this is not good. She needs to get married. Like, this is a problem. They also start to sense that maybe the Bene Gesserit's plan is to make them mate and fall in love with each other. They're obviously grossed out about that, so they kind of agree, yeah, maybe Aaliyah should get married. Chapter 8. So we see Paul has a meeting with Edric, the guild navigator. Now, this is the best that Midjourney could come up with in terms of a humanoid, amorphous fish man. Edric kind of accuses Paul of fraud. Paul has a really interesting talk with Stilgar where he asks him how familiar Stilgar is with the histories of Earth, ancient Earth, 10,000 years ago. Talks about Hitler and Genghis Khan and how many people died under them, millions of people, which was proportionate destruction for how big and expansive the universe was. Paul's death toll, I think, is in the 60 billions. Paul basically says, like, these men, and Stilgar doesn't know shit. So Stilgar's like, oh, like, sounds like they were effective in their goals. And Paul's like, the problem is that these people probably had the same justifications that I'm using to justify my reign and my jihad. I never have thought Paul is this like evil Anakin dark side turns to the dark side. He has always been in a reluctant position of power. In chapter 9, we have Aaliyah and Hate go out into the desert to investigate the strange death of a Fremen woman. It's very weird and concerning because this woman was addicted to samuta and also poisoned. This isn't something that we see very often take place in the desert. Something is amiss. Aaliyah is concerned. She just can't take her eyes off of Duncan, Idaho. She is all over him. They actually chat and then they kiss. She's like, how dare you? I'm going to tell my brother. And he's like, go ahead. I only take what is offered to me. Bow, chicka, wow, wow. Chapter 10, Paul goes into a spice trance. So he willingly gets super high. He is pressed, okay? He's meditating on his death and his insignificance and everything that's going to happen. He looks inward. He knows that he must discredit himself in order to end the jihad. He sees himself as a falling moon. Quote, he despised his own thoughts. He loathed his city. Rage rooted in boredom simmered deep within. He sees that his government has fallen into old patterns. And then he also at the same time realizes his own insignificance. Muad'Dib's jihad is no more than an eye blink in this grand event. Paul knows he's still a pawn in the greater plan. Even someone as great as him is a mere speck in all of it. Here is another good quote. Even seemingly eternal stars flicked and dimmed and died. What mattered a single moon in such a universe? So chapter 11, Gaius Helen Mohiam goes on a walk of shame through this elaborate throne room. It's really beautiful. It's very symbolic. And Paul calls her there because he wants to barter for Chani's life. He knows that Chani is going to die at the end of all this. He's still trying to save her. And he even offers to give his seed to impregnate Irulan via like IVF, artificial insemination. Reverend Mother is horrified because the Bene Gesserit are above such animalistic impregnations and says no. Chani is meanwhile pregnant at this time. Chapter 12, we have Fishman and Alien Man, Scythiel and Edric chat about the conspiracy. They kind of talk about how Paul is just a pawn as well. Quote, he didn't use the jihad used him. The conspiracy is kind of falling apart because they just don't understand each other. Scythiel, for instance, thinks Edric is just a money-obsessed idiot, and they worry about the consequences of their actions in the grand scheme of things. Chapter 13, Chani is back to Paul and Chani. Chani is getting an appointment for her pregnancy, and she realizes that it's going to be a very high risk birth because that little bitch Irulan has been feeding her a contraceptive, which is definitely going to harm her birth journey. Paul won't tell her what he's seen. He kind of worries that they've made a mistake with Hate. Chani is highly suspicious of Hate. She's like, get this man out of here. We have Scythiel. He morphs into Lichna. She's the daughter of Otheim, the Fremen woman who Paul kind of knows from way back in the day, so he does have a memory of her. Paul knows that this is an impersonator pretty much right off the bat. He is like, okay, well, this is clearly like that's clearly someone else, but kind of goes along with it. She asks Paul and Chani to come to the desert, and Paul like can't really think of a reason why he shouldn't go to the desert. So this is just one of those weird things. It's like he knows that he's being bamboozled and they want him to come into the desert, and this probably won't end well all around. Chapter 15, on his way out into the desert, Paul walks around in disguise and sees Aaliyah doing this worshiping ceremony. So the most important thing that you need to know about this that will be important in later books, primarily Children of Dune, is that Aaliyah is really starting to enjoy being the surrogate godhead. People ask her to predict their futures. They are chanting to, it's like the cult of Aaliyah. And Paul watches from his disguise and he kind of just reflects on his own hate, how much he hates the fanaticism, and also wondering what she can see. Do their visions differ? What is she seeing that he can't? So chapter 16, Paul visits a Fremen dwelling where he meets a dwarf named Bijaz. He sees like it's slightly off from his vision, and that really intrigues Paul. Like Paul had a vision that he would go out into the desert, but he didn't envision that this dwarf would be there specifically. And there's a really interesting quote from the moment the jihad had chosen him. So again, he never chose that power, that evilness. It chose him. He'd felt himself hemmed in by the forces of a multitude. Any delusions of free will he harbored now must just be a prisoner rattling his cage. The curse being that he saw the cage. I love that. I mean, that just really encapsulates like how Paul is feeling. The dwarf, meanwhile, is talking in riddles. He is a pawn, another face dancer of the Tleilaxu. So he obviously has nefarious intentions. Paul has a guard around him, like all his men, but just, I don't know, still there. Chapter 17. Okay. This is when shit goes down. Paul and his men are hit with a stone burner attack. A stone burner is a destructive weapon. Okay. It kind of blows up everything like a bomb, and it's releasing a massive amount of types of radiation that causes instant blinding. Now, this is important. Paul loses his eyesight. He goes blind instantly. His men go blind instantly. However, Paul can still see because of his oracular vision, so he can still see what's going on. But this, being blind on Dune, and especially amongst Fremen culture, is a death sentence. Fremen do not care for their blind. They abandon them. They're left to fend for themselves, and they die because being blind is a huge liability. They can't really take care of the blind. And so if you're blind, you're dead, essentially. So Stilgar is horrified, right? Stilgar is like, oh my God, but is also like aghast that Paul can still see. Also, I need to read this quote. So every chapter of the Dune book starts with like some sort of quote. I need to read this one. The convoluted wording of legalisms grew up around the necessity to hide ourselves from the violence we intend toward each other. Between depriving a man of 1 hour from his life and depriving him of his life, there exists only a difference of degree. You have done violence to him, consumed his energy. Elaborate euphemisms may conceal your intent to kill, but behind any use of power over another, the ultimate assumption remains, I feed on your energy. I'm going to start using that and telling people who waste my time that they are basically trying to kill me, because it's only a matter of degree. Anyway, Paul is blind. This is a big deal. Chapter 18, this picture is really cool, by the way. He buys eyes for his men, Tleilaxu eyes, but won't buy them for himself. Meanwhile, one of Paul's people, Korba, a Fremen, a former Fedaykin, is arrested and suspected of being a traitor. Altheim was able to give that information up. So basically what you need to know about this is the conspiracy is being unraveled and people are starting to get executed. People are starting to pay. Chapter 19, Hate goes and visits Bijaz, who gives him a command. It's a very trippy, a very interesting conversation where Bijaz is like, look, someone is going to die. And at some point, Paul will come to you and be like, she's gone or it's gone. That is going to trigger you to become Duncan Idaho, because the whole debate of this book is he Hate, is he Agula, or is he Duncan Idaho? And Bijaz, who is Tleilaxu, is like, you will become. Bijaz's whole thing is that he came to control Duncan Idaho and turn him into a weapon. So at some point you will remember you are Duncan Idaho, and then you make a move on Paul. You become him, maybe you stab him, maybe you offer him the ability to get back his loved one, i.e. Cheney, because he'll see that you have become Duncan Idaho and he'll see how effective it is, and then he'll want to bargain for the life of Cheney, and he'll be willing to give up everything to have her back as a Gula, but then that's actually her. So it's this very trippy conversation. Bijaz is basically like, well, Paul is basically a Harkonnen. I mean, the Vladimir Harkonnen was his grandfather. So all you're doing is really killing an Harkonnen. Okay, master manipulation, gaslighting, Bijaz going on. Anyway, Hate doesn't really remember the conversation, but he knows that he's been given a compulsion from the Tleilaxu. Chapter 20, we have Hate is back to creeping on Aaliyah. She's taken a massive dose of spice. She's kind of reflecting on her child one day, who will be the father. Duncan gets her help and she's just like, I just want to be loved. I just want someone to love me. And he's like, I love you, Aaliyah. And it's cute. They found love in a hopeless place. Chapter 21, it's time. Paul and Cheney go to the desert. Cheney is about to give birth. Like, Paul and Hate are just realizing shit's about to go down. Hate tells him, like, look, I know I've been given some compulsion. I know I'm probably a danger to be around. Shit's gonna go down. They're seeing the writing on the wall here. Chapter 22, there's a quote when everything comes crashing down. And I just love this. Like, it makes me cry. It was mostly sweet, and you were the sweetest of all. Cheney dies in childbirth and has twins. Breaking news, Hate becomes Duncan Idaho. He breaks through. He breaks on through to the other side. He's Duncan Idaho, but yet he breaks through his own training, the compulsion. He does not turn into their instrument, their pawn. But then Scytale, who's been that Fremen girl the whole time, is like, I'm gonna kill Paul. He lunges at Paul, who now is kind of in this like weird time dilation, can't really see with his oracular vision. Paul sees through the eyes of his new son in the fucking crib. I told you this book gets weird. Paul sees what's going on, kills Scytale because he's harnessed the vision of his child. The kids are clearly sentient. He names them Leto and Ganima. Bijaz comes in. Did I have this? Yeah. So chapter 23, I think this is kind of this may have happened in chapter 22, but Bijaz comes in and is like, okay, well, we're still winning, you know, we're gonna bargain here. And Paul's like, well, I just killed Scytale. And Bijaz is like, I don't care. We will bargain with you. You can have Cheney back. We will do what we did we'll pull a Duncan, Idaho on Cheney. We'll get her flesh back to you. And all you have to do is renounce your godhead, give up your chome holdings, like discredit yourself, what have you. And Paul orders Duncan, Idaho to kill Bijaz so that Paul is no longer tempted. He just lost his beloved. She was the sweetest one of all. She was his beloved. Their love story is so sweet. Anyway, Paul does what a Fremen does, because at the end of the day, he might be the emperor, he might be the Kwisatz Haderach, he might be the Lisan al-Gaib, but he is a Fremen. And he dies a Fremen's death by walking off into the desert to let the desert make the call. Duncan and Aaliyah, they're upset, they're really sad, but they bond over this and start executing Paul's political enemies, including the Reverend Gaius. Helen Moheim, R.I.P. bitch, you bad bitch, R.I.P. That is Dune Messiah. Has that been on the whole time? Anyway, that is Dune Messiah. Thank you so much for joining me on this wild ride. I hope that kind of clears up what happens in the book and what some of it means. If you want me to take a deeper dive into any of this, I'm still planning on doing a couple deep dive into the scenes from the original Dune book that were left out of the film. I appreciate your support so much. Please help me get to 1,000 subscribers. That is my goal. So if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, your support means the world to me. I love chatting with you guys in the comments, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Go out there, read some stories. I will see you next time. Bye.